Hey folks, welcome to Ham Radio on Fire. If you like my content, please remember to subscribe below. Give me a thumbs up if you don't mind, and share this video with anyone you think might benefit from it. A couple weeks ago, I was asked to do a radio show with our local representative. And he had seen a movie on Netflix recently. You probably know which one it was. And he was asking, what about radio communications? What about prepping? What do I need to do to get started in this? And so he's a little late to the game because a lot of us out here have been doing this for years. Many of us do this professionally, like myself. So prepping is not really the same thing as emergency preparedness. And the distinction in my mind is where with emergency preparedness, it's FEMA, it's your local emergency management agencies, it's the Red Cross in your area, it's the Southern Baptist Convention and their disaster relief organization. Those types of things are the things that I think about when I think of emergency preparedness. We're trained through incident command to consider the whole community, which includes roads and grounds, it includes transportation, it includes public utilities, it includes Red Cross, Southern Baptist Convention, other organizations like that. It includes police, fire, EMS, paramedics, you name it, and the military are all part of that whole community in terms of incident command. And so one of the things I like that people to think about is to make sure you include your neighbors in your planning efforts, any kind of emergency preparedness you're doing, because if you're prepared and your neighbors next to you aren't prepared, then you're in a situation where you have a problem, because you can't even cook a bowl of rice without somebody being able to smell it. Especially after 3 days without food, they're going to smell rice cooking, even inside your house. And so you really need to get with your neighbors and you need to talk to them about some things. So remember, we have some things that drive this. So, we can kind of look back in terms of the prepping and go, oh, the Carrington event, that happened back in 1859. And that was a big geomagnetic storm that caused the Morse code lines to catch on fire. It actually injured some of the Morse code operators during the early era. We have a lot more wire, a lot more electronics out now that could actually be at risk of this. But that's kind of out there. It's a little bit extreme type of stuff. Let's move on down the list. We have the New Madrid earthquake. Now that moved back in 1811, and that rained church bells from the Mississippi. It rained church bells in Philadelphia. And the Mississippi actually ran backwards so long that there were saltwater fish temporarily in Reelfoot Lake in the northwestern part of Tennessee. So that's a real thing. We're well overdue for that. And you might say, oh, that's out there. That's never going to happen. But I got to tell you, I've heard the director of TEMA, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, right out of his own mouth. The first 3 words he was planning for were tornadoes, something we deal with all the time. A little less often, but we deal with is flooding. And then the third thing he said, he said that word. It was earthquakes. And so that's on their mind. And, earthquakes in the magnitude of Indonesia and back in '04 when we had hundreds of thousands of people getting killed, whole villages being washed away, that may not be of an issue to us, but certainly getting shaken and potentially all of our first responders having to go to West Tennessee and Arkansas and Missouri and you name it to actually help people out there. A little closer to home, we had the Nashville floods back in 2010. And then remember, if you were in Tennessee, the Waverly flooded back in 2021. That whole town was swept under a flood that just happened like that from a gigantic thunderstorm, a belt of them that got stuck over their community. So think about the things that could possibly happen in your area. Think about your whole community and your neighbors. Now remember, we have communication problems. We've had cyber attacks. AT&T went down a couple weeks ago. We had a Nashville bombing here that definitely impacted some people. So those are some things that are on my mind as well. Emergency preparedness, remember, is a community effort. And you'll need the community to get through what's coming, because that's the only thing we have is each other. So some things I recommended during my radio show with our state representative a couple weeks, I went through some things and I asked him 3 questions. The first one was, can you boil water and sanitize that water without electricity? And you think about the the fires in West Texas that happened. I think 1.4 million acres were burned up, and that just happened last month or the month before. It was really recent. There was a standing order to boil water because it wasn't sanitary anymore. And so that's an easy problem. You could do propane, you could do a campfire out back, you can solve those problems pretty easily. The second question I asked him was, can you keep your family warm without electricity? Fortunately, we're coming in the spring. Summer will be here soon, so that's not the issue with that like it would be in the winter months. But there's ways to solve that. You have a wood fireplace or a campfire out back, or you got blankets and sleeping bags, propane heater as a backup. Get a carbon monoxide detector. That's definitely really important when you're using that. So that's an easy problem to solve. This next problem, I got him. And this guy's a communicator for a living. So he's on a radio show, and he's He's just basically a representative in our state government, so he talks and communicates for a living. And this is the one that hit him right here. Can you communicate with your friends and loved ones without this? That's a full stop for most people. 99.99% of people, that's a full stop. You just can't do it. And so how do you do it? That's the question. Well, you can do what I do. You got you're a communicator with the state and the county. You got ham radio licenses, a couple of them. That's one way to solve it. But most people aren't going to do that. GMRS is the other way, and I'm working with the folks in my neighborhood right now to get set up with a general mobile radio service. It's a $35 license, no test. The FCC issues the license. They're good for 10 years, and they're good for everybody in your family, which is wonderful. So it's a really cheap license, and I recommend it because, remember, the FCC is an enforcement and a regulatory agency, and so they can come to your house and collect up your stuff if you're breaking the law. So just remember that. Good to practice it as well. Tell the police officer, a friend of mine, you wouldn't take your service pistol and never use it. You have to practice with it, and he shoots his once a week. He goes to the ring once a week. So he calls radio nerd stuff, but to be honest, I mean, if you don't practice your radio work, you're not going to know what to do. You might say, well, I got that Baofeng radio. I'm good to go. Well, you have it programmed, don't you? You got to ask that question. Do you have your frequencies, your offsets, and your tones programmed correctly? Have you tested all those? Are they working for you? Do you know the difference between duplex and simplex communications? What is that? Those are some things you have to understand to use radio. So that alone could be hard. Well, you might say, well, I have an HF radio or high frequency radio. Man, you would be lost in that type of situation if you're on HF frequencies and you don't know what you're doing. People aren't going to talk to you either if you don't know what you're doing. So that's swimming in the deep end with that one. And so that takes some time, probably a year or more's worth of practice to actually get good with it, feel comfortable with it, know what antennas work for what frequencies and what bands and that type of thing. So if you wanted to get in the radio, look into that. But that's definitely an option with that because these phones were very reliant on these. The Nashville explosion happened back in 2020, Christmas morning, and these things weren't working for most people. As well, AT&T was hacked. It was a cyber attack just last week. These were down for a whole day, so people who needed these for their business had nothing. And so really I'm recommending to the civilian masses out there is get a GMRS radio. That's probably the most important thing you can do. Some other things you can do is, and this is what I was going over in the radio show, is make sure you have 3 days worth of food, water, and medications for everybody in your home, including your pets. And that's probably really important, especially with the meds. Remember, each person needs 1 gallon of water per person per day in order for you to fulfill the needs of that person. That includes drinking, bathing, and that sort of thing. And that's a minimum. And so how do you get that water? Where do you store it? Think about things like that. How are you going to handle that? Adopt the one is none principle. If you have one pocket knife, okay, you lose it, you got no pocket knives in that. You got one compass, you lose it. You got one radio, you break it, battery dies on it, you got nothing. And so adopt the one is none, two is one principle. And that means have a backup of some critical things like a radio, a knife, matches, lighter, some fuel, those types of things. These are some things that I went over. Remember, here's something else you can do. Let's say you like eating peanut butter. Just use that as one example. You could take rice, you could take beans. Always have at least a backup. So I'd call it a double up. You're going to double up on all of your stuff. And that's important. So when you have that jar of almond butter or peanut butter in the cabinet, always have one sitting right behind it. And so that way, when you're working on one, when you crack into the second one, you go to the store and get your next backup. And that way you never really run out of things. Do that with cartons of eggs, jugs of milk, as long as you're going to drink them. Because it's really easy with prepping to get, this is the difference between emergency prepping and preparedness, is you might get like a whole room full of stuff, but it will go bad before you eat it because it's mostly going to sit idle. Because things don't happen that often. They will come eventually. And so dehydrated foods are good. Make sure you can actually stomach them. They don't give you heartburn or they don't make you have diarrhea or gas constantly. For instance, I can't eat lentils. I'll leave that alone, but I cannot eat them. People back them up in beans and stuff. They'll tear me up. So I have to plan according to that. You have to think about those things. Get your own house in order as well. Make yourself physically fit. If you're not out getting physically fit, you're a liability to yourself and to your neighbors as well. You can't help anybody if you're a victim yourself. And so it's a really good philosophy to adopt with that is don't become a victim first. And how do you do that? You keep yourself healthy. Get those teeth worked on. If you got a tooth that's bothering you, you don't want to be like the guy in the movie knocking his tooth out with an ice skate. That's just something we don't want to mess with. So maintain that oral health as well, so that, if there is a disaster, you can't get to the dentist, like back during COVID, as an example, you couldn't get to the dentist for a while. And if you had a bad tooth, you might have been in trouble during that. As well, make sure that automotive care is taken care of. So keep up with your vehicle. I like to keep my gas tanks full in the vehicle. I've done that since COVID. Basically, when it hits the half tank mark, I fill it back up. And just a routine we get into. Lots of people, though, it's the other way around. They're running with $5 worth of gas left in the tank, and they're running on fumes continuously. First off, it's hard on your fuel pump. And secondarily, you're a real liability. So what's the range of your vehicle? Is it 200, 300, 400 miles? Whatever it is. That's how far you can go on one tank of gas. And that's it. So your car is only as good as one tank of gas. But if you only have a few gallons in there, you ain't getting far. You're not going to get out of town with that. Secondarily, your car is only as good as one flat tire. So if you don't have some sort of inflator to use, you could be in trouble with that. So make sure you got an inflator. The kind that you can plug into your cigarette lighter is usually good enough, and a tire pressure gauge, and that way you can maintain that tire pressure as well. All right, so those are just some things I'm thinking of. As well, when you're doing this, all your preparations, put them on paper, pencil and paper, okay? Write them down. Don't print them on, don't write them on the computer and then never print it. Because if your computer doesn't work, you don't have access to that information. So if you have stuff that you've set up for your family and everything, write it down, write out where it is, how to use it, how to get the instructions for it, where the instructions for that might be. And so that if you're not around, they can actually do that. These are just some things that are kind of on the agenda. This was sort of a synopsis of that radio show for anybody interested in it. I'm going to kind of do this a little bit around the family as well. I'm checking my list a little bit. With that, that's kind of it. I do recommend you go to the American Red Cross and to FEMA's websites. Look for their emergency preparedness for your household websites. I'll link a couple of these in the bottom. And those are some websites you can go to that will give you a laundry list of things. Print them out on paper, real paper. Okay. Put them in a folder somewhere that's prominently marked so you know where it is, so you can get it back out. And print those things out. Go down that list and check it off one thing at a time. Kind of prioritize it. Okay. Go food, water, shelter, and first aid. And then sanitation. You need to be able to sanitize things because you don't want to be getting sick because you're not cleaning your dishes properly or you're not washing your hands properly. You need to maintain your hygiene because that will get you sicker and shut you down quicker than anything at all. Those are some things. This is Ham Radio on Fire. I hope you like my content. If you do, please remember to subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up if you appreciate this. And other than that, you have a good day. Take care.